Welcome to this seminar. This one is titled, When Can We Retire and How Much Can We Safely Spend? And this is a case study for a 62, 60-year-old couple. We're going to look at it using Income Lab software to better understand their situation and answer the questions that this hypothetical couple may have. This is being recorded in September of 2024, but the information we're going to talk about and the concepts and the learnings, this should be relatively evergreen. So if you're looking at this in 2025, 26, or later, the vast majority of it should still apply. Meet Jeff and Sarah Dow. We've created a relatively simple case for them. Jeff is 62 years old, Sarah 60. They hope to retire 2 years from now in September of 26 when they are 64 and 62 years old. They have an income of Jeff at 100,000, Sarah at 125,000. Based upon their incomes, we can estimate their Social Security at full retirement age 67. Jeff should receive around $2,800 per month, Sarah about $3,200 a month. However, Jeff and Sarah are both worried about Social Security. They know that at this point, the Social Security surpluses will run out. And if no action is taken by Congress in the future, then there won't be 100% funding paying out. Based on those projections, Social Security is only being funded at about 79% today. So if no action is taken, Social Security payout could be reduced by 21% to only 79% of projected payouts. So with that in mind, and then not having a whole lot of trust in the government to get problems resolved, for the purpose of the case, we're going to model Social Security at 75% of their projections. So we're going to put $2,100 per month for Jeff and Sarah $2,400 per month. For their investments, we're going to assume that each of them have $750,000 in their 401k. That'll be a pre-tax basis. And they have a $500,000 brokerage account, half of which is basis, what they paid in, and half of that is growth. We're going to put them in a really simple portfolio, a 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio. This is probably the most common for retiree folks. I'm just going to keep it very simple. Now, they do have a few what we'll call variable expenses. And I say that's because they're temporary. They have start times, they have end times. They're not base load across their entire plan. They have a 36 months, 3 years remaining on their mortgage. This is at $1,500 a month. And this is the principal and interest portion of their mortgage, $1,500 a month. Remember, the taxes and insurance portion that you might pay if you have escrow, that continues even after you pay off your mortgage. You still have to have insurance. You're still going to pay taxes. But the principal and interest portion that will expire is $1,500 a month, and the model will account for that. And Jeff and Sarah have a retirement wish list for retirement, and they would like to spend about $25,000 a year through age 75 and 73. This gives them about 11, 12 years to do some significant traveling after they retire. And they do anticipate at some point they will get older, they'll be less able to take trips. So they're trying to front load all that and get it done by this 75, 73 time period. So we're going to look at some of the classical questions that retirees have. When can we retire? How much can we spend in retirement? Really, how much can we safely spend in retirement? What will happen to us if the market crashes? What's the best drawdown strategy to minimize taxes? And what about health insurance before Medicare age 65? And retirees often have many more questions in this, but these are really the biggest ones I think most people will bring up. And we're not going to answer these directly one-on-one. We're going to dive into the Income Lab software. And in the process of looking at their case, we're going to be addressing all of these. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll circle back and make sure that we've hit all these well. Here's the Income Lab software. And we'll start in this Life Hub. It gives a brief overview of their situation. We can show the modeled sections. We can see their income is being put in here. We can see the time period at the top. You can see the little jiggling right in here, but when those things apply. Zero Social Security, but obviously Social Security for these later years, starting in 2031 for Sarah, 2029 for Jeff. They have portfolio withdrawals here in expenses. We can look at some of their expenses. They have this retirement travel from 2026 to 2037. Again, $25,000 a year. We can see their mortgage is for 3 years. We have some additional medical payments. So we've decided for modeling purposes to add $1,000 a month for additional medical if after they retire, but before Social Security. So if they have to get COBRA insurance through Dow, or if they have to get medical insurance through the healthcare marketplace, we're allocating extra money for that. Roughly $1,000 a month is pretty typical. Although there are ways to get subsidies, we're just not going to get into that level of detail here. We're just going to account for that spending. Again, $1,000 a month after retirement until age 65 for Sarah and Jeff. In their assets, just a summary of what we've shown before. But we have $750,000 in each of their 401ks. We've got $500,000 in a brokerage. So they have investment assets of about $2 million. Now, note we do have their house here at $500,000, but the model is going to completely ignore this. It's not going to use this in any calculations. Likewise, if we inputted savings accounts or checking accounts, those are not really retirement assets. Those are flexibility type accounts that you're always going to have some sort of balance. Neither banking accounts nor housing is incorporated into the model. It's just there for the client to be able to see it. Now, if you do have a really large savings account, we would incorporate that as an investment account, really. But just typical, cash flow sort of accounts, we don't bother with those. Only these numbers are going to be used in some of the calculations. Now, if we shift on over to the dashboard, the big question is how much can Jeff and Sarah safely spend? And we're just working with the default numbers for Income Lab. And Income Lab is saying that they can safely spend $11,500 per month in retirement. That'll be September 2026. Remember, they're going to work for 2 more years as of today when this is being recorded. Okay, and this number, keep in mind that this is today's dollars and rounded, and this is monthly. So if we wanted to see that in yearly, very easy, $116,000. We'll go back to month. If we want to see what that 11,500 is going to be in the future, well, there's going to be some inflation. It's closer to 11,900. But we're going to keep things in real terms. That means inflation adjusted, so we don't have to worry about future buying power changes. So when you see that we're in the future and we're talking about 11,500, that's the same 11,500 today. Where in reality, it might be a bigger number, but the purchasing power is the same. Working in real numbers with present values allows us to simplify and not have to worry about the inflation effects. So it gives us a much better feel for what these numbers are and the purchasing power that they have. So the way this spending capacity is calculated is this is based upon Income Lab's use of risk-based guardrails. And this is a philosophy to determine how much one can spend in retirement. The first approach to this was done by William Bingen, I believe around 90 or so, 1990. This is where the 4% rule came from. And it's quite outdated, but it was very, very powerful because it opened up a new concept and people have expanded upon that. You can think of that as the first car. Now, of course, there's been a lot of technical evolution and cars today are much, much better. And it's the same thing with retirement guidance on spending. The 4% rule was the first attempt at it. Today, we have much more sophisticated, much more accurate methods. And I would encourage you guys to use some of those more accurate methods. Today, the state of the art, in my opinion, would be the risk-based guardrails, which Income Lab software is utilizing. What it's doing is it's doing Monte Carlo analysis. So it's doing looking at historical market data, and it's running 1,000 cases of possible market returns year by year to create 1,000 different scenarios of what could happen for this client. And then it's choosing the one where It's choosing a point where you have an 80% chance of underspending. So if the client spends $11,500 per month, then they have an 80% chance of underspending, and there's a 20% chance that they are overspending. Now, whether they're underspending or overspending, you don't really know because we don't know what the market in the future is going to be. Maybe things are going to go up quite a bit. Maybe we're going to have a Great Depression type downfall. So we don't know whether it's going to go up or down or what the future has, but we're just choosing a point on the conservative side where there's an 80% chance of underspending and a 20% chance of overspending. And that's our starting point for Income Lab. And another point I want to make while I'm thinking about it is this does not cover the variable expenses. These are the ongoing for the complete plan expenses. Anything variable, like the mortgage, like extra medical premiums that we talked about, or the travel budget, that's all in excess of this. This is their baseline spending. And we'll be able to show you a little bit more on that. Now, the way the guardrails work, as I said, we're starting at a point where we're at this 80% chance of underspending. If the market does really well and the Monte Carlo updates itself and it says we're starting to approach a point where it's a 100% chance of underspending, we hit an upper guardrail. It says at this point, okay, there's almost no chance that we're overspending with this sort of budget. Let's increase the budget. It's safe for the client to spend more money. There's no significant risk of them running out. So what it does is it does its calculations through the Monte Carlo and says, okay, with the balance having grown as it has, in this case to almost 2.9 million, how much can the client start spending going forward such that they're again at that 80% underspending risk? Still conservative, but not as conservative as it had grown because the market did really well. And in that case, it says the client can start spending 14,500. Now, there's also a possibility that the market goes down. And in the case where the market goes down, we hit another guardrail when we get to 1.662 million in this case. This is the point where we're using Income Lab default. We've reduced the chance of underspending down to 25%. So now there's a 75% chance that we're overspending with this budget that we have going on. And at this point, we say, well, it's no longer conservative. It's starting to get a little uncertain. The market has dropped. It hasn't bounced back quickly like it usually does. And at this point, maybe we should start doing a little belt tightening and preparing ourselves in case things don't recover well. So in this case, we hit this bottom guardrail for decrease, and the recommended spending changes from 11,500 down to 10,900. So you can kind of see how we have these guardrails, and we can change where the guardrails are, but by default, we start at 80% in software. We increase spending if we had a 100% chance of underspending. And if we get down to 25% chance, we have a spending decrease. And we can see it a little bit here. Maybe this is a little better visually. But yes, if the portfolio goes up by 26%, it basically allows us to increase our monthly incomes by 26%. If the portfolio drops by 27%, we hit our bottom guardrail. And that has just a nudge in the right direction to start tightening the belt. Usually the market recovers. We don't want to overreact and get too drastic in cutting back on our spending, but it doesn't call for a 5% reduction in spending. And if things stay bad or get worse, then there may be another reduction. But oftentimes after the market has dropped, it comes back relatively quickly. And now we're again within our two guardrails. You can look at the cash flows a little bit. And this just kind of further emphasizes what I showed you before about the assumptions. The first 2 years, we have Jeff's salary, we have Sarah's salary. We have their Social Security. Jeff starts 2 years before Sarah's. You can see this little tranche here. Maybe you notice how there's this drop here. This is their travel budget. They've got this $25,000, roughly $2,000 a month travel budget that they're allocating. which basically says that all of this is some extra cash flow that they have. This is cash flow we've allocated to pay for their tax bill. Because as we'll show you in a little bit, for their case, the most ideal scenario is for them to do some Roth conversions on the front end. And that's going to have some high tax liabilities in the early years. And we need to make sure that they have the funding to justify that. So we're setting funding aside to help pay for that extra tax bill so they have a more steady spending throughout their plan. And one thing you may notice is that their spending is decreasing, and that's not a problem. That's actually by design. You see, it's just slowly decreasing. This is actually based on some research which has been coined the retirement smile. And you may have heard of this as when people retire, they have what some call the go-go years, and then the slow-go years, and then the no-go years. There's a natural tendency for retiree spending to decrease over time. And you know, just think about it. If you think about a stereotypical 60-year-old couple and the natural spending that they like to have versus a 70-year-old couple versus a 90-year-old couple versus maybe a 100-year-old. You know, you think in your mind about 90 and 100-year-olds, they're not going to rock concerts, they're not going to bars, they're not going to fancy restaurants. It's just not typically what that age group does. There is a slowing down that naturally happens to most people, and we're factoring that into the model. Okay? And that being factored into the model basically frees up money that we can use in the more active years to help the client enjoy those early years of their retirement more. And it looks like this is a dropping of money, but that's because we're looking at it in real terms. Remember, inflation adjusted. In reality, their spending is actually going up because inflation, but they're not spending as much as inflation. Click this to nominal. So you can see in actuality, yes, their spending is going up, but it's not going up as fast as inflation. And again, we like to keep this in real terms for the most part. It's a little easier to visualize the spending and how much it might reduce. We can also look at it from the expense side. You see we have 3 years on the mortgage. There it is. Okay, yellow is our mortgage. You can see we have 3 years on a mortgage. We have a few years of additional medical. If you remember, that was $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year for any years in which the clients are retired, but not yet eligible for Medicare. You can see their big chunk of retirement travel from the point in which they retire for about 12 years, $25,000, $2,100 a month. And we also have some expenses that we're creating this Roth conversion tax offset. So we want to make sure that we have money pulled out of the account, just designated to help pay for these large tax bills, which they're going to have in their early retirement years. Now, if we kind of test this plan, and this takes just a few seconds to populate. Okay, now we can see how the plan as built, and as you've seen, we have the expenses and all the assumptions built into it, how it fares. And we see that in 81% of Monte Carlo simulations, they're above plan. Basically, it allows you to spend more money. And the average of these 81% is 31% above plan. So 31% more spending than the original plan was. And we have about 19% lower. And on average, those lower cases, spending drops by 8% below plan. And this 80% shouldn't be very surprising because remember at the very beginning, we started with a conservative starting point. We started with that 80% chance of underspending, which means it's logical that in most cases, we should be able to increase spending more than decrease because we're starting with an 80% chance of underspending. So if we look at what some of those scenarios look like, let's look at the, the more median ones. So we'll look at the 25th percentile, the 50th percentile, and the 75. You can just kind of see what those plans might look like. So if you remember, they had 11,500 per month, but these numbers are actually different numbers. You see, even for the median, 12,900. So what's happened is that in this particular Monte Carlo simulation, the market went up more than expected in the 2 years before retirement. I'm sorry, yeah, 2 years before retirement. So by the time it was actually time to retire, September 2026 in this case, the calculations worked themselves and said, okay, our 80% underspending target, it's not 11,500 anymore. It's drifted up to 12,900. So in that case, they're starting with more money to spend. Uh, and in this case, you can see that there's no actions, there's no guardrails hit until they get about 17 years into the plan. You see the blue. Now it basically says, okay, now you can have what looks like a 24% increase in spending. And then this particular Monte Carlo simulation, the 500th best out of the 1,000 that's being run, it goes on, and about 30 years into the plan, things get a little tighter and there's a couple drops. But we can just kind of get a feel for how it goes. Okay. And we'll shift to the legacy. And legacy is basically how much money is left in the account. And the point that I want to make with this is even if we look at the worst possible case, this is the worst of the 1,000 Monte Carlo simulations where the money drops and it's terrible. And U.S. has never seen anything this bad, but that's what you get when you do Monte Carlo. But the point is, you never run out of money. The system is designed so that you always adjust and it never runs out of money. And that's just by default the way it works is that you keep hitting a guardrail. It may tell you to spend less and spend less and spend less, but if you follow the rules, you never do run out of money. The same thing is that you can never outlive these plans. Because what happens is every month the system reevaluates. So it's using actuarial data that says that, okay, for a 62-year-old and a 60-year-old today, statistically speaking, how long will one of them be alive? And that is the length of the plan. Now, if 10 years later, now we have a 72-year-old and a 70-year-old, they say, okay, actuarially speaking, how long would one of those two still be alive? That's going to be a later period. If we have a 90-year-old, it's not going to say, oh, we did expect a life expectancy of 88 and now you're 90, the plan is done. No, it's going to say, for a 90-year-old, how long should we expect this 90-year-old to live into the future based on actuarial statistical data? It's going to keep adding years to the plan and updating itself and adjusting income flows as needed. And it does have a minimum plan length of 5 years. So you can never outlive the money. You'll just have adjustments. And that's really the beauty of this software is it's not static like the 4% rule was with no adjustment. This is all about responding the way humans naturally respond. Uh, when things are going really good, we feel comfortable spending more. When markets are really, really bad, we have a natural tendency to spend a little less and not go on luxurious trips and things like that. So it basically reacts somewhat naturally how people tend to. And it ensures that under no scenarios do you ever run out of money or do you outlive your money. It's all about adjustment. Remember, this is a dynamic guardrails philosophy. Okay, from here, let's jump into the tax side. The tax is my favorite. Well, before we do that, let's just look at the median. So the median, you'll notice it doesn't run down to zero. And in many cases, it does have extra money left over. That's just the nature of the software because we're never depleting it. It just has incomes that continue to increase. This is Income Lab's Tax Lab. There's a few things here, but we'll come back to that. First, I want to show the strategies. There's lots of tax strategies that Income Lab is calculating in the background. You can see there's probably about 15 different tax withdrawals or income withdrawal strategies that have different tax impacts. First one's pro rata. What if you pull proportionally from the 401ks and the brokerage account? A classical approach is to exhaust taxable assets and then your tax deferred 401k and then tax free Roth HSA. Remember, we didn't incorporate those into model. We kept this case very, very simple. But for each of these different scenarios, And it's looking at all the different Roth conversions to in the brackets 0, 10, 12, 22, 24, 32, and on. We're calculating average tax rates and the total taxes. And these total taxes are on a net present value basis. This is really what we want to focus on. The one with the lowest total taxes is the best case. That's also designated by this green star and the one that I've used for this case. In this case, 616,000 in total tax net present value. Okay, and I'm going to compare that against strategy 2, where we do this common tax withdrawal of the taxable, tax deferred, and tax free. If we look at the strategy 1 versus strategy 2, you can see that the tax rate is significantly lower if we do this Roth conversions to the 24% bracket. The total taxes are substantially lower, $344,000 lower with this tax strategy versus that one. And this is one of the reasons I love this tax lab. I think this is super powerful for any retiree who's looking at making these sorts of decisions. I think this is just a must have, this sort of guidance. And it's not easy to do intuitively um, because it's got some nuance in the tax code. The tax code is complicated. And this is nothing more than a decision that one makes, but a decision that can have an enormous impact, hundreds of thousands of dollars, based upon a simple decision that you make on how best to withdraw and live your retirement, fund your retirement. And again, this is net present value. In reality, nominal terms, it's even bigger, 931,000 when it does those calculations. But again, we like to keep things in real terms, so we think about it in today. Today, $334 of impact. So an enormous difference. And then we're going to kind of look at why 24%, because that kind of seems like a bit unintuitive. It wasn't my first guess, but it does make sense when you dig into the details. So if we look at the total taxes, these are the two different scenarios. First, we'll look at the Roth conversion to 22. So the blue, these first 2 years, remember the client is working. And then we kick in Roth conversions in 2026 after they've retired. We end up with 5 years of heavy taxation. And we've got 2 more years with some taxation. This is actually the follow through from IRMA. If you remember IRMA, this is where Medicare costs you more because you have higher incomes. And remember the way this is calculated, it's your prior tax year. So it ends up having kind of a 2-year lag. That's why we see IRMA drag for about 2 years. But yes, we're basically front loading and paying our taxes early so that we have very little taxable money in these later years of the plan. Whereas the classical approach, where we exhaust our taxable account, remember we had 500,000 in that brokerage account, we end up with lower tax rates on the front years, but then as we start withdrawing from our 401ks, we've got more of a sustained taxable income. And at some point, we start having some what looks like RMD issues, where we're having to withdraw more of the money than we really need, and that's creating some higher tax bills. And remember, this is 60,000 net present value, so really high taxes on the back end. This is all because of the RMD formulas, required minimum distributions. So the question is, what causes this? And there's actually 2 main things that are at play that are making these Roth conversions very attractive. The first is that since investments typically grow faster than inflation, there's an advantage of doing conversions earlier rather than later. Now, if your investments are growing the same speed as inflation, the tax tables change with inflation. So if both are growing the same as inflation, then there's really no major impact of earlier versus later. But if your investments go up 50%, you kind of wish you had paid that tax bill last year as opposed to this year, because it's going to increase your taxes much more when you have more money that needs to be converted, and it pushes you into higher and higher tax brackets. So that's the first impact, is that with Roth conversions, it's usually better to do it in the early retirement years, because we want to convert before that money grows too far. It's likely to grow faster than inflation. The second big impact with this relates to Social Security. and this one is quite subtle, most people tend to miss, is that the taxation of Social Security is not like the taxation of normal income. The amount of your Social Security that becomes taxed is a function of your income. And for most people, the way that formula is designed, they pay income tax on 85% of Social Security. Now, for folks who have really meager, let's say, poor retirement years, so the government doesn't want to tax 85% of their Social Security, so based on the formulas, they could be taxed on a much lower percentage of their Social Security because they may be near the poverty level or something. But by utilizing Roth conversions and utilizing this strategy, we have low taxable incomes in these years, and you can benefit from that lower taxable rate on Social Security. So all of these years, we can save substantially on the taxation of Social Security, and that ends up being a pretty big benefit. And we can dig into that a little bit here. So if we'll just pull a year, let's say 2035, 2034, and say most people end up paying income tax on 85% of their Social Security. That's not the case because we've done these strategic Roth conversions up to the 24%. We've gotten all this taxation out in these years. And now if you look at the taxation, the taxable Social Security is only $840. $840 of their Social Security is counted as taxable. $53,200 of their Social Security income is being considered non-taxable. And of course, they still have the income. They're still pulling, it looks like $100,000 out of their Roth account. So they've got all the funds, they've got the cash flow, but the taxability, we've controlled it such that they're able to essentially avoid legally. Remember, tax avoidance is good. Let me get that right. We can strategically avoid taxation, not breaking any laws, just using the rules to our advantage. And in this case, we get a substantial amount of Social Security income that is not being taxed. And that occurs within all future years of this plan. So that ends up being a huge tax advantage. And I think that's one thing that's driving this huge advantage, this savings of $300,000 of taxing. A lot of that is on the Social Security side. And that's something that a lot of people will miss. And the reason why you should reach out to a financial planner to make sure this nuance is being addressed, to find out what's best for you, because these decisions are incredibly impactful. And yeah, working with a financial planner can be expensive, but so can making the wrong decision on taxation and costing yourself $344,000. Right? Let's keep it in perspective. So there's a lot of value in reaching out for experts, particularly in this retirement phase where some of the decisions you make are incredibly impactful. Now, it seems kind of foolish that you're going to pay this high 24%, but that Social Security is so powerful that it says it actually makes more sense to pay this much higher rate than we have to now because we'll save so much more on the back end. Okay. Now, one thing that Income Lab is doing is they notice with the Roth conversions, they're looking at each Roth conversion level, each tax bracket level. What they're not looking at, and it's not practical to look at, is okay, what about the scenario where I do the 24% for 2 years and then I do the 12% afterwards? Income Lab doesn't look at that by default. It looks at only 24% for the life of the plan or only 12% for the life of the plan. However, once you're living out the plan, it may adjust. What Income Lab can tell us is that right now, the best path to start on is the 24%. 2 years down the line, when it redoes its calculations and it sees what the market has actually done, it might say, hey, you were on this plan, it was the best one, but going forward, there's even a better tax strategy plan. Maybe we want to shift to the 22 or maybe to the 12. And it's going to show you even greater savings benefits than what we've already shown here. So we do have that ability. Income Lab doesn't look at all that immediately, and it really doesn't have to, because it's just addressing 1 year at a time. We don't know what the future is going to be. And until that future arrives, we don't know what the best path forward is going to be. But as you live through the plan, we are able to make additional tax strategy decisions, something that's going to save future income. And we just keep revising this every year, just making sure that we're doing the thing that is most important and most useful to the client. So there's really so much value in these tax side, and that's why I like the tax module most. The next segment addresses the what ifs, and this is a common question. What if the market drops? What if we go into a depression? What if we have a recession? What if, what if, what if? And this fear of the unknown is really what keeps a lot of people from confidently deciding to retire. And we want people to have that knowledge, to have that understanding so that they can retire when they can retire, that they know that they can retire and they can comfortably enjoy their retirement as much as possible. This whole thing is about enjoyment. And if we get into the what if, this is the retirement stress test module. So this is, what if the financial crisis happens again? What's going to happen to my portfolio? Am I going to run out of money? Well, what happens is we take the historical data from the global financial crisis and apply it directly to the client's plan. So remember, we were anticipating about 11,500. Now, 2 years before the financial crisis, the market did pretty well. And by that point, it projected that you're no longer at 11,500 income, you're at 12,600. And then retiring, this is the worst possible point to retire, right in the crisis. But even though you had this increase, you were thinking 11.5. Okay, you hit some negatives. It did drop you. It encouraged you to reduce your spending down to 10.5. I'm sorry, 10,200. But it's not that bad. You're not so far below when you were kind of planning of 11,500. Yeah, there is some belt tightening. And while we're below plan, we don't really utilize the retirement smile. We just hold spending closer, and we basically drift back into the planned spending over time. So what this shows is that, yeah, the global financial crisis was bad, but it wasn't terrible. Is this a scenario that the client is comfortable with if they retire at the worst possible time before a financial crisis that looks exactly like this one? And that kind of can ease some concerns to say, hey, if I'm okay with one of these worst historical scenarios, then I should be okay going forward, because the likelihood of this being the worst possible month to retire, it's unlikely. And if we want to look at the Great Depression, we can look at something similar. And again, the run up to the Great Depression, again, we anticipated 11,500, but the run up right before things started crashing was actually quite good. Where again, it did its recalculation, set you at that 80% underspending level, and it's at 16,000. And it's not surprising. We have these huge drops, usually because there's some sort of bloating on the front end. What goes up comes down. And in this case, we 2 years before retirement, we were planning for 11,500. We had 2 great years. We said, oh man, I get to take out much more money. And then the bottom fell out. So we were thinking 11,500, and then we're thinking we're going to have this luxurious retirement at 16,000 a month instead. And then the Great Depression happened. We're dropping, but realize even where we're dropping, and we have this increase because things did improve, we're still pretty good shape compared to where we thought we were going to be, with that 11,500. So I would say the Great Depression scenario, it's really quite promising. I see it, as bad as you would think about this, for this client, they still have a very comfortable retirement, even if something as bad as the Great Depression happens. In this retirement stress test, this is all about easing those concerns, because it's natural that clients are going to feel the what if and that uncertainty, and it's that uncertainty that leads to fear. If we can address that uncertainty, we can get rid of the fear and have people comfortable and confident go into their retirement and not feel guilty. If the market drops, don't worry about it. When you hit a guardrail, we'll let you know. Until then, you focus on enjoying your life. Don't worry about the money. Okay? And we can kind of see how these guardrails adjust. We can see whenever it hits, just kind of visually seeing. I think this is kind of interesting. Remember, we always stay within the guardrails, and the system is designed so that you can never deplete all of the money. Now we go back to the dashboard. If you remember the spending capacity, 11,500, and this does not include the variable expenses, the retirement travel budget, the mortgage, any extra medical premiums. And at this point, the client may say something like, we really don't spend that much today. We only spend about $9,000 a month on those baseline expenses that you're considering. This is more than we need. What if we don't wait 2 years to retire? And we can look at that scenario real quick. So instead of a base case, the exact same case, but what if they retire at the end of 2024 and we speed up those additional medical premiums, we extend the period of their retirement travel and address for all those variables. And we can do that quick calculation to look at another retirement date. And in this case, if they choose to retire at the end of 2024, yes, they have less spending, but maybe this is the plan in the scenario that they prefer. They would prefer to retire January of 2025 rather than September of 2026. To spend an extra 2 years with a $25,000 a year travel budget. And to say that this is enough money for them to live the life the way that they want to. And again, they're going to have some different guardrails, but again, we have the same risk profiles for this. And this basically addresses, when can I retire? Now, there's also a lot of other tax things that I haven't gotten into here that's not really applicable to the model. Things like asset location. In reality, we're not going to have the same assets in pre-tax accounts and Roth accounts and all this. There's some tax optimizations that we would do. But this is really more of the minutia. This is where the advisor is using their brain to provide value. This is not something that the model is incorporating. It doesn't go into that complexity. The model is just looking at an overall portfolio. And remember, 60% stocks, 60% bonds. It's calculating from that point forward, and it's doing its Monte Carlo to determine how much can you safely spend. That's the value of the model. The one last thing I wanted to address, and we'll go back to the base case for this, is healthcare. A lot of people delay retirement because they're concerned about healthcare expenses. And remember, we looked at what typical healthcare expenses cost, roughly $1,000 a month. And people say, that's a lot of money. But really what I want you to look at, and let's see, we'll just go this year. We'll go 1 year back. Okay, those additional medical premiums, they're built into the plan. $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year. And the point I want to make here is look at the cash flows. Look how much money is moving around. Look how much is being spent. The spending is not just this 25. It's actually this tax offset as well. This 110 plus the 125, 126,000. They've got their retirement travel, they've got additional medical, they've got a big tax bill, which this is basically offsetting. But this 12,000, yeah, medical is expensive, but this is not a driving point for the model. This is a detail, it's not a major factor. So even though some people kind of delay because they're worried about not being eligible for Medicare, they think that external insurance costs so much. It's usually not the case. And it usually should not impact the client's decision of when they can retire. It's something that we plan for, but it rarely makes a huge difference in the plan, especially for a retiree in their 60s, where we're just talking about a few years for Jeff and Sarah's case. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. Medical, don't let it be the tail that wags the dog. This should not be driving when you can retire. It's just something that we account for, and it's a line item expense just like everything else. I will kind of return to the beginning. And I just want to correct, just a moment ago, I said a 60-60 portfolio. Clearly, you can't have that. 60% stocks, 40% bonds is what's built in. And we'll go back to the questions that we started at the very beginning. Remember, we didn't answer these directly, but we kind of answered them all in the process of looking through the model. When can we retire? Well, it really depends on when Jeff and Sarah, or how much Jeff and Sarah want in their retirement. If they want 11,500 or more, or if they're comfortable with $9,000 a month, that decides when they can retire, and it's that balance. Next question: how much can we spend in retirement? Remember, it's just that trade-off. The longer you work, the more you'll be able to spend. But what is the right balance for you enjoying your life? What's going to bring you the most enjoyment? What'll happen to us if the market crashes? We looked at the scenarios with the Great Depression, financial crisis, and we can kind of understand what those worst case scenarios look like and whether that's acceptable. If that's something we can deal with, or if we need to further protect ourselves by working a little longer to mitigate those negative impacts. The best drawdown strategy to minimize taxes, we showed you the tax lab and how powerful that is. That is worth financial planning all in itself, just to know and to be assured that you're doing the right thing with taxes, because that is so impactful. And again, it's not something that you can predict everything now, but 1 year at a time, it'll tell you the best thing to do. So that is something you want to revisit over time. And then we finished off with health insurance before Medicare. Again, like I said, don't let the tail wag the dog. It's usually not a huge factor. It's usually overblown to be a little bit bigger than it is. Yes, it is an expense, but it's easily manageable in most plans. So I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope kind of showed you the capabilities and things we can do with the Income Lab software. Show you what a case might look like if you resemble Jeff and Sarah Dow. And if you guys want to reach out, Scientific Financial, if you go on the website, you'll see several buttons where you can schedule a free 30-minute chat. I've got information on there, transparent pricing. Feel free to browse the website. And if you guys, I encourage you guys to show up to the free seminars, to reach out if you're interested, and have a good day. Thank you.